My sister had posted an X bench footstool on her Pinterest board, and with her birthday coming up, I decided to build her one. I started out with some thick oak stock that came from some freight pallets, but it still had some nails in it, some that you can see, some that you can't. So I just cut those off to start with, and then to try to be sure that I had them all, I also sanded down the surfaces so I could see better and used a stud finder set to metal and ran it over it. But now I've got some really warped boards, so to clean them up I used my straight edge jig on my table saw. I actually started trying to straighten them on a joiner, but I've got kind of a dysfunctional relationship with my joiner, so it didn't work very well. Back to the table saw. And it worked. That works fine. For one side anyway. The flip side is really tall, taller than I could do with the simple, with my straight edge jig. So then I took a simple 1/4 inch ply and just used that as a straight edge, pinned it down. And even that was too tall. So, but it was close enough. So then just pull the pins out and clean it up with the hand plane. So with 2 straight edges I could finally cut this down to the right size. So I cut these boards down for my legs and cut some extra pieces for testing. The legs were all cut down to the exact same length. I don't have the final length yet. As long as they're all the same length, then I can just cut them all the same. So here I'm just cutting some simple lap joints. And I actually cut these purposefully so that they weren't quite enough, weren't quite wide enough. And that way I could sneak up on the fit. So after cutting it out and getting an idea of just how close it was, I could move my stop block just a little bit and bring that in so that it was a really tight fit. I'm going to use through mortises through the cross lap joint, and I did those on the mortising machine. And it was close. It was a little bit off, and that compounds into a few more errors later on, but it worked out. With those cut, I marked the actual size, as you can see, and then used the speed tenon technique that I learned through fine woodworking. And that worked. This was the first time I tried that, and it worked really well. It was kind of fun. It does create, as you see, a lot of sawdust, especially using a crosscut sled, which I definitely recommend if you're doing this. But that restricted the dust collection from below, so all this dust was kicking up. But it was a quick way to create the tenons, and they worked out pretty well. They were a little small, and so I'll have to fix that. You see there's just a little bit of a gap. That won't be too hard to fix, but yeah, it was there. At this point, I was ready to cut the angles, and I just drew them directly on the board so that I wouldn't mess them up. It's just this point of a project when you cut the angle wrong and you'll lose the leg altogether. So, and again, because these were all the exact same size, I could just cut them without even measurements here. So the legs are done. It was time to build the frame for the seat, and that came together pretty straightforward. I just used dominoes, but it's a simple butt joint, so in many ways this could have been joined together. With the frame built, I could measure directly from it, cut the plywood for it, and chamfer all the edges. Also took this time to drill out some holes, just thinking that it's a way to let the cushion, when the cushion you're sitting on it or stepping on it, it lets the air out. I don't know if that really matters. Sounded like a good idea. So then it was time to do some sanding. So I did some basic sanding and then wet the boards down to raise the grain, and then went back in and sanded it back down. Here I'm pre-drilling all the holes, and actually these holes that I'm doing right now are going to come back and cause a little bit of a problem later. I didn't anticipate that the holes underneath the X-frames would be hard to get at, but oh well. And you remember that error from earlier, so got to fix that. I just ripped out a very thin, I actually cut several to finally get one that actually fit well. But with a little bit of glue, and then when I cut these down, you can't even tell. The tenons were cut long as well, so here I am shortening them down to final length. Everything's glued up now. A little bit of tear out, so just cleaning that up. And then chamfering the edges, and I just used a file for that. It is important that you have some sort of barrier between your piece and the file, or you'll create a ridge line right in your leg, and you don't want that at this point. So with everything glued together, I used a trans tint dye and let that dry, and then lightly just scuff sanded that down with some 220. And then I used a tung oil and applied that all over and wiped it off. And finally finished it with some shellac. So the woodworking part's done. Time to create the cushion. I could just measure it out and cut the cushion out. I originally tried to use this big old knife thinking it'd be good for cutting deeply through, but it worked terribly. So I got a very nice thin small knife that worked much better. So then I measured the height of the cushion and the ply together. And my idea here is to create the upholstery. Oftentimes you'll take it and just wrap it around and nail it in place and then cut off the excess, but I was going to try and sew up a piece that fit directly. I hadn't tried this before, so this was kind of just an experiment to see how well it worked. And I'm just using sheets actually that I got from the thrift store. So this is a simple flannel sheet. It'll be the underneath, it'll be underneath it all, and then there's just a simple gray sheet that will be the top covering. It's always nice when you're sewing to have a little curly-haired hobbit to help you. So I measured out and cut these two pieces. Once I had one, it was easy, of course, to cut the other. You can see it's just a big square with extended sides. I'm just going to sew those sides together. The length that I had measured earlier, the length of the plywood and the foam together, and then there will be some left over, and that will get wrapped under and stapled, as you'll see. So I'm measuring where I need to sew to. Everything's ready. It's finally time to sew, which means, of course, thread breaks. So, rethread, then we're ready to go. I am not very good at sewing, so I just picked a stitch that seemed sort of a heavy weight, give it some good reinforcement. But this is just a basic stitch, and then we'll turn this inside out. So 4 sides on each piece, and ready to go see how it fits. And it actually, it fit the first time, and it fit pretty well, so I got lucky, I would guess. So with this ready, just pull up the sides, make sure they're good and tight, and then start to staple them down. This being simple fabric, I'm not pulling this, I'm not grabbing it with pliers or anything to stretch it, really stretch it. Stretching it by hand was plenty enough for what I'm doing. So then I could cut off the excess and staple down the corners. Just fold those over, staple those down well, and then put on the top cover. And rinse and repeat. Again, I left the corners to fold over after cutting off the excess. Then I could come back to the corners and fold them over and staple them down flat. After testing it, it was sitting pretty well. One of these corners was sitting a little proud, so it took some persuasion to get it to sit flat. But then it was ready. I just screw it in from the bottom. Here's where you see how I realized that I didn't account for those cross brace legs, and it made it a little bit tricky to get the screws in. Did eventually get them in, and I was happy with the way it turned out. So, happy birthday, Carrie.